Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is For the Record program number 342. This is being recorded on January 5th of the year 2002, and I'm going to have to get my years down straight as we begin another year. This is not going to be a program, as advertised on the website, analyzing the substance of the 9/11/2001 attacks. That will come in future broadcasts. I'm going to be continuing with analysis of this event and related events for a long time because the waves continue to spread outward. I will be doing some analysis at least in the next broadcast. Let me refer listeners, though, to a couple of different sources. First of all, as you listen to the programs and if the presentation sounds pedantic or overwhelming, check the Spitfire website at www.spitfirelist.com and look in the For the Record section. There it will be a detailed and annotated description of each program listing the sources and each point of information. The Spitfire website at www.spitfirelist.com is equipped with real audio, and listeners can hear the pair of segments going out to the stations that carry this program on the Spitfire website. In addition, sister station WFMU-FM has been compiling the For the Record programs on real audio. More recent broadcasts are streaming at www.wfmu.org/Dave Emory. And I'm happy to announce that as of the beginning of January of 2002, virtually all of the For the Record programs, and my understanding is soon all of the For the Record programs, will be available for download only, those that aren't streaming, at a website that is linked both to the wfmu.org/Dave Emory website and to the www.spitfirelist.com website in the For the Record section. That web address is the obligatory http://archive.wfmu.org/archive/D_X/. So as you listen to the presentation, be aware that for all intents and purposes, all of the For the Record programs are available on the Internet, and you can always access those at a library if you are not online yourself. So a big tip of the hat to sister station WFMU-FM. Now, having said that, let's proceed with the focal point of this discussion, which is one of the major links between what I call the Underground Reich and the events of September 11th, and financial powers of center in not only the United States, but elsewhere in the, quote, Western world, unquote, and to the centers of petroleum power in the Middle East, primarily Saudi Arabia. We're going to review some of the substantive elements of Al-Taqwa / Nada management, and we're going to review some elements presented in For the Record 335 and in For the Record 340. I'm going to proceed briskly so we can get to the new material. Financial Times, Friday, November 9th, 2001, has the following article by Hugh Williamson and Philip Jacklin in Berlin. It's titled, Far Right Has Ties with Islamic Extreme. Pay attention to Ahmed Huber, to Nada Management, and Al-Taqwa, the key names here. One of the people identified by the U.S. government as providing financial support to the Al-Qaeda terrorist network is also a well-known figure in the European far-right political movement. The link is likely to raise new concerns over ties between Islamic and right-wing extremists. Ahmed Huber, H-U-B-E-R, a 74-year-old Swiss businessman and former journalist who converted to Islam in the 1960s, is a board member of Nada Management, a financial services and consultancy company which is part of the international Al-Taqwa group. The U.S. says this group has long acted as financial advisors to Al-Qaeda. Mr. Huber, who is based in Bern, is known in Switzerland and Germany as an Islamic fundamentalist who attempts to forge links to far-right and neo-Nazi movements. A spokesman for Germany's Office for the Protection of the Constitution, the internal intelligence agency, said yesterday that Mr. Huber, quote, sees himself as a mediator between Islam and right-wing groups, unquote. He also belongs to the revisionist movement, which believes the Holocaust did not take place, the spokesman said. Klaus Beyer, B-E-I-E-R, a spokesman for the NPD, one of Germany's main far-right political parties, said Mr. Huber has often addressed NPD events. Mr. Huber confirmed that he had had contact with associates of Osama bin Laden at an Islamic conference in Beirut. He is quoted in the Swiss media as saying that these people, quote, are very discreet, well-educated, very intelligent people, unquote. In interviews on Wednesday, Mr. Huber denied that Nada Management was linked to terrorism, although he admitted the company's sponsors were wealthy Muslims from Malaysia and the Gulf region. And we're going to talk about some of those wealthy sponsors later on in the program. In fact, some of the interesting links of those sponsors will be a major focal point of this broadcast. In For the Record Program 335 and in Program 340, we also dealt with one of the key links between Ahmed Huber and the Nazi past. That is a fellow named Johann von Leers, described at great length in Kevin Coogan's seminal text, Dreamer of the Day, Francis Parker Yockey and the Post-War Fascist International, that I've used many times in the past. There are many broadcasts featuring excerpts of the text of the Kevin Coogan book, and also a number of interviews with Kevin Coogan that are available either from Spitfire at P.O. Box 1179, Ben Lomond, California, 95005, email mail, mail, at spitfirelist.com, or you can access the material that's on the web at sister station WFMU. Coogan's book is published in softcover by Otano Media, copyright 1999. There's also discussion of von Leers in Martin Lee's 1997 text, The Beast Reawakens, published in hardcover by Little Brown. Now, we're going to access an article from the web about Holocaust denial. This is a piece of French text, and it talks about the link between Johann von Leers, who was the specialist for Joseph Goebbels' propaganda ministry for anti-Semitic propaganda, and Ahmed Huber. That relationship set forth at greater length and in its political and historical context in the aforementioned For the Record 335 and in number 340. This article is by Gilles Camassine, K-A-R-M-A-S-Y-N. It's titled The Friends of Foresson, or Les Amis de Foresson, Ahmed Rami. And the passage reads in French, Depuis son arrivée en Suède, Rami est très lié à l'islamiste pro-nazi suisse Ahmed Huber. Converti à l'islam au début des années 1960, or 1960 in French, Ahmed Huber côtoie dans l'Égypte nassérienne d'anciens nazis dont, principalement, l'ancien bras droit de Goebbels pour la propagande antisémite, Johann von Leers, lui aussi converti à l'islam sous le nom d'Omar Amin von Leers. Now in English, since his arrival in Sweden, Rami is very closely associated with the pro-Nazi Swiss Islamist Ahmed Huber. Converted to Islam at the beginning of the 1960s, Ahmed Huber was associated in Nasser's Egypt with old Nazis, among whom principally were the old right-hand man for Goebbels for anti-Semitic propaganda, Johann von Leers, himself also converted to Islam under the name Omar Damin von Leers. Now, we're going to move from material that we've covered in the past to the present, and we're going to take a look at some of the interconnecting links between Nada Management, part of the Al-Taqwa group, and members of the Saudi elite. And bear in mind that this is a milieu that overlaps not only the German so-called neo-Nazi NPD, but also the Third Reich past, including the operations that took place in Egypt under the auspices of the Skorzeny-Galen CIA mission in the 1950s, and some of the underground Reich and international fascist international links that obtained in that part of the world from the pre-World War II period all the way on up through the present. The following is from a conservative website. That website is www.freerepublic.com, and in turn, that website has posted an article from the Boston Herald. This article is from the Boston Herald of Thursday, November 8th of 2001. The article is by Jonathan Wells, and it's headlined, Rich Saudis Said to Back Bank Linked to bin Laden. This deals with Ahmed Huber and some of the wealthy Saudi backers of Al-Taqwa/Nada Management. It reads in part, an Islamic bank in the Bahamas linked yesterday to terrorist Osama bin Laden by the U.S. Treasury Department was bankrolled in part by wealthy Saudi Arabian families, according to one of the bank's directors. Ahmed Huber, a director of Al-Taqwa Bank, said in an interview in 1995 that oil-rich Saudi families, quote, are very active, unquote, in funneling money to the bank, which has been identified for years as the main financial institution behind the Muslim Brotherhood and other radical Islamic groups. Yesterday's naming of Al-Taqwa as a terror bank, coupled with Huber's candid admissions 6 years ago about the bank's backers, is more evidence that members of the ultra-rich Saudi elite had been quietly financing bin Laden and other terrorists who are now at war with the United States. That revelation is of immediate concern to U.S. leaders who still count on the Saudi monarchy as America's staunchest ally in the Persian Gulf. Huber, who gave the interview to Swiss journalist and author Richard Labeviere, Labeviere, was included on a new list released yesterday of 62 entities and individuals linked to terrorism whose assets have been frozen by executive order of President Bush. In addition to Huber, Al-Taqwa Bank, Al-Taqwa Management Company, Yosef M. Nada & Company, Himat Establishment, and 3 other officers of the Al-Taqwa Financial Group, Mohammed Mansour, Yosef M. Nada, and Ali G. Himat, were on the list of people and organizations allegedly involved in financing bin Laden and other terrorist groups. Also mentioned was Nada Management Organization, the new name adopted by the Taqwa Group after Swiss authorities probed its ties to terrorism several years ago. In the interview, Huber, a Swiss citizen and radical Islamist, refused to identify Al-Taqwa's financial backers with one exception. Quote, "As for the money, I cannot give details except for Saudi Arabia because that will change the bad perception people have of this country," unquote, Huber said. Again quoting, "Of course, the Saudi government is under American surveillance, but the kingdom has the advantage of being a feudal state. That leaves the great families total freedom to manage their oil funds as they wish." That's great, and today the Saudis are very active, but the details of their funds that come to the bank are a matter of bank secrecy, unquote, Huber said. By the way, Richard Labeviere's book is called Dollars for Terror. Skipping down. Huber, 74, is a former Swiss journalist who lost his last writing job in 1989 when he forcefully supported the Islamic fatwa calling for the death of Salman Rushdie, author of The Satanic Verses, unquote. Huber, named Albert Friedrich Armand Huber by his Protestant parents, is a self-proclaimed proponent of uniting right-wing Christian nationalist groups in Europe with radical Islamic fundamentalists. According to an account in Labeviere's book, Dollars for Terror, Huber's office is decorated with photographs of Adolf Hitler, Heinrich Himmler, and Turkish Islamic Party leader Necmettin Erbakan, E-R-B-A-K-A-N, and I may be mispronouncing that. That, again, a Boston Herald article from Thursday, November 8th of 2001, authored by Jonathan Wells, posted on the conservative website freerepublic.com. There was an article about Nada Management and Yosef M. Nada, which further detailed some of the wealthy Saudi backers alluded to there by Holocaust denier Johann von Leer's associate and NPD associate Ahmed Huber. This is from the Wall Street Journal of Thursday, December 27th of the year 2001. This article is by Roger Thurow, Thurow. It's headlined, "The Scattered Case Against an Alleged Terror Accomplice," subtitled, "U.S. says Yosef Nada aided al-Qaeda, but it would be very difficult to prove." This article does appear to be spun to a certain extent, but whatever the actual involvement of Al-Taqwa and Nada Management in terrorist activities per se, there certainly are evidentiary tributaries linking these institutions with institutions that, on the one hand, are certainly implicated in terrorism or individuals implicated in the terrorist milieu, and beyond that, and far more importantly for our purposes and for the purposes of analyzing the September 11th events, these same institutions, whether or not they are directly involved in terrorist activities as alleged, bridge the gap between individuals and institutions, that word that I love to use, the milieu, of terrorism and of September 11th and of al-Qaeda, with some of the most important corridors of financial and petroleum/industrial power in the world, including those in Saudi Arabia and those in Washington, D.C. and Houston, Texas, including the corridors of power that lead directly to and through the family Bush. That's family Bush, by the way, not family tree. Skipping down in this article, which is datelined Lugano, Switzerland, again, Wall Street Journal, 12/27, 2001. Speaking of Nada Management and Youssef Nada, the pieces are widely scattered. The Swiss raid netted documents from a raft of business activities around the globe, as well as Mr. Nada's phone index, which he says has more than 10,000 business contacts. During a simultaneous search of Mr. Nada's house in an Italian enclave within Switzerland, Italian police found a photo of Mr. Nada and Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein. In a third coordinated raid, Liechtenstein authorities discovered a nest of companies stashed behind the nameplate of a local trust company. In the Bahamas, the troubles of now-defunct bank Al-Taqwa came under renewed scrutiny. Skipping down and noting again some of the Nazi heritage of Saddam Hussein and his pro-Nazi uncle, Karula al-Tufa, who tutored him. Skipping down about Youssef Nada and Al-Taqwa. So far, his bank accounts and those of several companies fingered by the U.S. have been frozen in various countries. U.S. intelligence officials, who provide few details, say much of their evidence comes from intelligence intercepts that they say were damning enough to put Al-Taqwa on the White House target list for financial sanctions. And apparently, enough to place Mr. Nada on an immigration watch list of people suspected of terrorist links. He says that in December of 1999, he was prevented from entering the U.S. when he stopped in Atlanta on the way to the Bahamas. But the Swiss, who also had intelligence reports raising suspicions about the Al-Taqwa network over the years, say those reports aren't necessarily enough to prove a criminal case here. Indeed, Mr. Nada argues that he is a victim of circumstance and that his is a case of guilt by association. Skipping down, I would add there are one hell of a lot of associations here. One wants to avoid guilt by association, but on the other hand, association by guilt is another situation altogether, and that's one to be that's a possibility to be examined here. Mr. Nada speaks openly of being a member of the Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood since he was 17, and he grows animated when recounting how he was rounded up by Egyptian police and held for 2 years with other Brotherhood members in the mid-1950s. He volunteers that the Brotherhood was banned in Egypt decades ago, but notes that it isn't on the U.S. list of terrorist organizations. He says it has nothing to do with Al-Qaeda. By the way, I would add parenthetically a number of members of the Egyptian Brotherhood, or Egyptian Muslim Brotherhood, have turned up in the ranks of Al-Qaeda, whether or not the organization itself is continuing. U.S. intelligence officials cite Bank Al-Taqwa's links to Youssef Qaradawi of Qatar, spiritual leader of the Muslim Brotherhood, who has publicly praised Palestinian suicide bombings against Israeli civilians. Mr. Nada says he has known Mr. Qaradawi for decades and adds that he heads the bank's Islamic legal panel, which reviews investments to assure they comply with Islamic business practices. But does this mean I'm a terrorist, unquote? Mr. Nada asks. And as we move to inside discussion about Al-Taqwa, skipping down again, more about the associations. Mr. Nada's name has also surfaced in various intelligence reports and media stories in Europe and the Middle East over the years, linking his companies with groups throughout the Muslim world, including Hamas, the militant Palestinian faction. 2 of his close business associates have been involved in Islamic centers in Munich and Milan that German and Italian officials have been investigating. And skipping down again, of some of the key Saudi participants in the Nassau, Bahamas bank Al-Taqwa. Bear in mind the Ahmed Huber discussion from the Boston Herald article that we just looked at. At the same time he was opening this office in the late 1980s, he was also founding Bank Al-Taqwa in Nassau, which attracted more than $200 million from shareholders and investors, including, he says, 6 members of the vast bin Laden family. The bank, he says, became the repository of all of his businesses and operated as a mudarabaha, which he describes as a kind of Islamic mutual fund. So note that 6 members of the bin Laden family were investors in Bank Al-Taqwa in Nassau. I would also note, for the record, so to speak, that Lugano, Switzerland, is the geographical operating center of the Thyssen-Bornemisza family, one of the principal elements in the remarkable and deadly Bormann Flight Capital organization that I've spoken about. We'll touch on that later. I would also note, as we saw in For the Record Program 335, Al-Taqwa/NADA is being investigated by the Swiss authorities in connection with the insider trading in various securities that some have suspected was linked to the September 11th attacks. What we're going to do next is to look at a remarkable article from the Swiss publication Weltwoche. That's spelled W-E-L-T-W-O-C-H-E. That translates World Week. And this is from the Weltwoche publication from the first week of 2002. It had also previously been on the web for the last week, the 51st week of 2001. But it is now on the web as the Weltwoche issue, the first week of the year 2002. The Weltwoche website is www.weltwoche, one word, .ch / etc., etc. The full web address for this article will be posted in the description in the For the Record section for the For the Record 342. Now, this article from Weltwoche is by Johannes von Donanyi, and I may be mispronouncing that, D-O-H-N-A-N-Y-I. By the way, translation credit on this goes to a member of the listening audience. This is titled Terror Trends, Arms Trafficking, and Completely Legal Financial Enterprises, the Connections of Islamic Terrorism Reach into the Power Centers of the West, and it reads as follows. For over 2 decades, the Pio Manzo Institute has been one of the leading international think tanks. Here on the Italian Adriatic coast, senior statesmen like Henry Kissinger and Mikhail Gorbachev, strategic experts like Edward Luttwak, or futurists like Alvin and Heidi Toffler have debated geopolitical developments. For many years, financier Youssef Mohammed Nada sat in this illustrious circle. The Syrian, who lives on Lake Lugano and holds an Italian passport, is president of the Nada Management Organization, S.A. Until February 26th of this year, that's 2001, this firm was listed in the Lugano Trade Registrar under the name of Al-Taqwa. The Jordanian Secret Service uncovered connections of Al-Taqwa's recently liquidated bank in the Bahamas to Osama bin Laden's terror network, Al-Qaeda. By the way, I would add that the disclaimers that Mr. Nada disclaims these connections. I would note that 6 members of the bin Laden family have been were among the original investors in the Nassau branch of Al-Taqwa. Continuing. Nada's partner Gilab Himmat, H-I-M-M-A-T, is included in the network of the Muslim Brotherhood, an organization associated with terrorism. And within this milieu, we find Ahmed Huber, a Swiss-based Holocaust denier who converted to Islam. The membership of Dr. Nada in the UN-associated Pio Manzo Institute has since been suspended. Incidentally, his spokeswoman believes the, quote, unfortunate affair, unquote, will soon be cleared up. And the next section talks about some of the links between Al-Taqwa, some of the evidentiary tributaries, as I like to call them, running through various global elements allegedly associated with Al-Qaeda. And in turn, as we look at a dizzying connection a dizzying series of connections between powerful Saudi financial institutions and some of the institutions apparently and allegedly involved in Al-Qaeda and terrorist activities, note among other names the name of Khalid bin Mahfouz. The bin Mahfouz family, like the bin Ladens, are one of the elite families of Saudi Arabia. They are fabulously wealthy, and in a number of For the Record programs, those programs dealing with the Arbusto Energy, Bush, James R. Bath, bin Laden family connection, and there are many of those, including 325, 329, and 330. I noted that James R. Bath, who was involved with the milieu of the BCCI and who was also allegedly working for the CIA, was, in addition to an original investor in Arbusto Energy, the North American business representative for the bin Laden family and the North American business representative for the bin Mahfouz family. Khalid bin Mahfouz is apparently married to one of Osama bin Laden's sisters. Bin Laden's father, Mohammed, by the way, very close to King Ibn Saud, the founder of Saudi Arabia. Now, note the links between Khalid bin Mahfouz and the bin Mahfouz family and many of the institutions apparently or allegedly involved with Al-Qaeda. Note on the other end of this balance, so to speak, note the connections of the bin Mahfouz family to very important centers of economic and financial power in the West, including centers connected to the Bush family that we've spoken about in the past. And bear in mind that bin Mahfouz was represented in North America by James R. Bath, who also represented the bin Laden family and who was one of the principal investors in Arbusto Energy. And bear in mind that Osama bin Laden is married to Khalid bin Mahfouz's sister. You're going to hear a dizzying series of connections here, and you're also going to hear a number of interesting evidentiary tributaries running in the direction of areas that we've spoken about in the past. Note, as we get ready to conclude this side, and this discussion is going to be continued in the next side, note, first of all, connections running in the direction of the Kosovo Liberation Army, or the UCK. Some of those connections running through Tame Consulting in Malaysia and running through Afghanistan. Note connections to Somalia and alleged links between a Somali banker and Osama bin Laden. Note also links running from an organization called Sakina Security Services to, of all places, an alleged training site for Islamic Mujahideen, this in, at least according to this article, the United States. And one of the areas where they were recruiting Mujahideen to serve in was Chechnya. Note that in For the Record 182 and also in For the Record 329 and later in For the Record 340, I raised the issue of the possibility of operations, and I believe we also spoke about this in number 341 as well. I spoke about the possibility that elements of what I call the underground Reich, elements of the Wahhabi activist milieu, which would include Osama bin Laden, and elements of the Western petroleum industry might very well have been collaborating in connection with the unrest in Chechnya. When we get into some of the analysis of some of these connections, and I would stress that listeners should not oversimplify the nature of these relationships. This is a very complex event. As we get into some of the analysis and speculation, I would note that one of the major dynamics to observe is the very fact that there are a number of different factions and power elements involved in this milieu, and that their interests overlap in some ways, and yet they also conflict in others. That was also true of World War II, in which, among other families, the Bush family helped to finance the Third Reich and fascism, and yet the United States was also, in the end, involved in fighting fascism on the battlefield. That has taken place again. I would also note that it is, in fact, some of the links between some of the corridors of power and some of these elements which, in the end, seems to mandate cover-ups, both political and journalistic cover-ups, and it is those cover-ups that helps to obfuscate some of these realities, and one could say it is those cover-ups that has sort of obligated the very necessity of For the Record. And we're going to continue with that necessity, specifically For the Record 342 in the next side of the broadcast. Remember, Spitfire will carry an annotated description of For the Record 342 in the For the Record section of their website at spitfirelist.com. And sister station WFMU has two websites linked to the Spitfire website, wfmu.org/Dave Emory, with For the Record programs streaming, and a longer website with virtually all of the For the Record programs available for download only on Real Audio. The Spitfire website is also equipped with Real Audio. This concludes Side 1 of For the Record Program 342, Al-Taqwa. We're going to continue with this in the second side of the broadcast. This is being recorded on January 5th of 2002. My name's Dave Emory. Thanks for listening. Hello, my name's Dave Emory, and this is side 2 of For the Record program number 342, Al-Taqwa. This is being recorded on January 5th of the year 2002. Please note the error on the website. Actually, it's not an error, but an incorrect prognostication that in 342, I would be analyzing some of the events in and around the September 11th terrorist attacks. That will come in number 343, and undoubtedly in subsequent broadcasts. There will be numerous future broadcasts for the foreseeable future on the September 11th events and related matters, so please note that. In this broadcast, we're dealing with the Al-Taqwa group and NADA management. This is an institution that is being investigated by the Swiss authorities in connection with the, among other things, the alleged stock market manipulation in anticipation or apparent anticipation of the September 11th attacks. It involves people like Ahmed Huber, an associate of the German so-called neo-unquote Nazi NPD. Ahmed Huber also was an associate in Egypt of Johann von Leers, Joseph Goebbels' right-hand man for anti-Semitic propaganda. He also has converted to Islam and is a Holocaust denier attempting to unite European and fascist groups around the world with Islamic extremists. What we're going to do in side 2 of this program, for much of the duration, is to take a look at a very important article from the Swiss weekly publication Weltwoche. That's spelled capital W-E-L-T-W-O-C-H-E. It is German for World Week. This was published by Weltwoche and is on their website for the first week of the year 2002. It was originally listed on their website for the 51st week of 2001, but is now listed. It's copyright 2001, but is posted on their website for the first week of 2002. Their website, by the way, is www.weltwoche, one word, WELTWOCHE.ch. This article is by Johannes von Dohnanyi, and I may be mispronouncing that, D-O-H-N-A-N-Y-I. It's titled Terror Trends, Arms Trafficking, and Completely Legal Financial Enterprises, The Connections of Islamic Terrorism Reach into the Power Centers of the West. And we're going to pick up with this article where we left off on side 1. Now note in particular here the profound connections between elements apparently or allegedly connected not only on the one hand to NADA management, but also apparently or allegedly to Al-Qaeda and the terrorist milieu of Osama bin Laden. And note the connections on the other side of the equation to power centers, very important power centers of financial and economic power, financial and industrial power, I should say, in particular petroleum industry power in not only Saudi Arabia but also the United States. Note the evidentiary tributaries connecting this milieu with elements of the Bush family. Note in particular the name of Khalid bin Mahfouz, who was married to Osama bin Laden's sister, an individual that we've spoken about many times in the past, James R. Bath, the North American business representative for the bin Laden family and an original investor in Arbusto Energy, was also the North American business representative for Khalid bin Mahfouz and the bin Mahfouz family. That discussed, and among other broadcasts, 325, 329, and 330, or for the record programs 325, 329, and 330. Note in particular in the following discussion, the links between Sakina Security Services and apparent trainers with, among other things, Western national security backgrounds. Note also the links apparently between this recruiting effort and the fighting that has taken place in Chechnya. As discussed in For the Record 182 and 329, I have speculated about the possibility of overlap between elements of the intelligence community associated with the petroleum industry and what I call the underground Reich in the activities in Chechnya, and specifically the connections of those elements to the Wahhabist activity in Chechnya. Wahhabism is the radical right-wing Islamic sect that is propagated by Saudi Arabia and discussed in For the Record program number 329 as Islamo-fascism. Note also the connections between the bin Mahfouz family, the bin Laden network, and the power elite of Saudi Arabia and institutions that have, as a matter of public record, been involved on the part of the Saudis with financing Islamic fundamentalism. And note the evidentiary tributaries, as I like to call them, between, on the one hand, elements associated with Osama bin Laden and terrorism, and also, on the other, allegedly, to NADA management. After discussing a NADA spokeswoman's belief that the allegations of terrorism will soon be cleared up, the article then has a section called From Slovenia to Malaysia, and it reads in part as follows. In fact, it reads as follows. She could be in error here, for meanwhile, the Italian authorities are interested in Youssef Nada and his business. In Florence, they've been investigating a Somali banker who was alleged to have transferred gold from Nada's firm to bin Laden. Somalia, by the way, I would add parenthetically, now a projected area of anti-terrorist activity by the United States. Continuing. Early last September, their colleagues in Slovenia uncovered 48 tons of weapons in Koper Harbor. That's K-O-P-E-R. A certain Ismail, with the firm Tame Consulting in Tamantung, Malaysia, had declared the freight as machine parts, unquote. The investigators maintained that the cargo in fact originated from Afghanistan and was intended for the Kosovo Liberation Army in Kosovo. There are indications that the previously hidden trails of evidence also connect to the Nada group. At present, an investigator wished to, quote, neither confirm nor deny, unquote, the respective rumors. By the way, apparently intelligence services in a number of countries have been investigating these allegations and believe them to be substantive. Continuing. Ismail belongs to the Malaysian Muslim organization Al-Arqam. This group runs an international video rental chain which serves as a communication center for the fundamentalist underground. This organization, which in Malaysia has been prosecuted for using religion as a cover for subversive activities by its founder, Ashari Muhammad, is a recruiting center for Osama bin Laden's holy warriors from Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia, and the Philippines, according to Singapore's intelligence service. The Internet reflects some of the interlocking areas in international terrorism. On one of Al-Arqam's websites, filled with religious content, there was a link entitled Alice in Wonderland. For the initiated, knowledgeable reader, this was in fact a portal to a wonderland of hate and violence. From here, the link eventually leads to a site for Sakina Security Services, a firm registered in London. The Sakina Security Services is one of the main links here. By the way, the formal title of this article was Im Wunderland des Hasses, H-A-S-S-E-S, and I believe that means malice in Wonderland is basically what that means. That's the formal title. I read you the English translation of terrorism, etc., etc. At the beginning, by the way, this was translated for us by a listener. Now, returning to the substance of the article of Sakina Security Services, we read, Sakina Security Services was a thinly disguised organization for the recruiting and education of Jihad warriors, unquote. The website contributors, according to their own admission, learned their trade in, quote, in the British SAS, that's their Special Air Services commandos, the French Foreign Legion, the U.S. Marines, the Libyan Special Forces, and the Soviet Spetsnaz, that's the former Soviet Special Forces, unquote. Sakina offered a 2-week terrorism course in America, note that, as, quote, the ultimate jihad challenge, unquote. The course syllabus included sharpshooting, jungle warfare, arms smuggling, and the art of preparing an ambush. At the very bottom of the web page was a link to the actual destination, a mosque in front of the blazing word Chechnya, unquote. The past tense is noteworthy. In the middle of last week, British police sacked the offices of Sakina Security Services in southeast London and arrested business manager Suleiman Bilal Zainul Ibidin. Sakina founder Muhammad Jamil escaped, however. The education offer, unquote, like most of these belonging to Islamic extremists, is no longer operating on the Internet. The, quote, training area, unquote, in America has still not been located. Zainul Abidin has close contacts to the supporters of Islam, unquote, which Egyptian-born Abu Hamza leads out of his mosque in Finsbury Park, London. Hamza has allegedly fought in Afghanistan. He spread bin Laden's call for holy war on the Internet, quote, "Whoever takes up the sword will rule the world," he preached to his followers, who last year joined him at a paramilitary training camp. Abidin maintained contacts to Syrian-born Sheikh Omar Bakri in the London suburb of Tottenham. He claims not to understand the reasons for Sakina Security Service's closure, quote, "They only joined to swim, box, and practice martial arts together," unquote. Bakri has expressed sympathy for bin Laden in the past. From Palestine to Kashmir to Bosnia and Chechnya, quote, "All occupied Muslim territories must be liberated by a holy war," unquote. Most fundamentalist Internet sites eventually refer visitors to Mabata, which is one of the electronic media mouthpieces for Libyan leader Muammar al-Gaddafi. A radical, thorough investigation and exposure of the international financial structures is crucial for the success of the declared worldwide, quote, war on terrorism, unquote. The relationship between the billions of dollars upon which the terrorist accounts feed and those in Western power centers. I'm going to repeat these last sentences because, in fact, it is this dynamic that is what has permitted many of these relationships and networks to continue. At times, I think they are exploited by elements associated with the petroleum industry for covert operations and basically as de main. In turn, I think they have been used for what is quite literally, despite the connections of powerful Western elements to these powers of center, for a war against the United States, analogous in that regard to the Second World War in this context. Repeating these last couple of sentences, a radical, thorough investigation and exposure of the international financial structures is crucial for the success of the declared worldwide war on terrorism, unquote. The relationship between the billions of dollars upon which the terrorist accounts feed and those in Western power centers. It goes without saying, writes the Paris-based information service Intelligence Online, quote, that the business of the bin Mahfouz clan was barely scrutinized, either in Europe or in the United States, unquote. Now, note that Khalid bin Mahfouz is married to Osama bin Laden's sister, and note the connections on the one hand between the bin Mahfouz milieu and al-Qaeda, also on the other to BCCI itself, with many connections to terrorism, drug smuggling, the intelligence community, the Iran-Contra affair, and elements associated with the Bush family. And note again the link here to James R. Bath, although his name is not mentioned in the article. Note that Khalid bin Mahfouz's North American representative was James R. Bath. Turning back to the discussion of the bin Mahfouz family. Multi-billionaire Khalid Salim bin Mahfouz was not merely one of the key figures in the international scandal surrounding the Bank of International Credit and Commerce, the bank used by Muslim fundamentalists, secret services, and organized crime. Bin Mahfouz was also a partner to the bin Laden family, among others, in banking and telecommunications sectors, in the oil business, and in the American pharmaceutical firm Hybridon. By the way, I would note that that's located in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The Boston area was the geographical base for the bin Laden family in North America, and many key members of the bin Laden family were flown out of the United States right after the September 11th attacks, when all flights were grounded, all commercial flights, and this was before the FBI could interrogate them. Continuing. Speaking of the bin Ladens and the bin Mahfouzes, both families are business partners of Saudi financier Gait Faron, who likewise played an important role in the BCCI scandal, and who, in the mid-1980s, became embroiled in an abortive operation in the Seychelles Islands to buy atomic weapons for Gaddafi. The worldwide bin Laden clan solemnly swears to have broken off any relationship with Osama. Yet much circumstantial evidence suggests that at least indirect contacts continue. Evidence trails also lead to Khalid Salem bin Mahfouz, whose sister, according to CIA statements, is married to the terrorist. Bin Mahfouz is president of the Saudi Sudan Bank, or SSB, in Khartoum. He appointed Saleh Idris as director of SSB. Idris is the official owner of the pharmaceutical Al-Shifa factory, one founded by Osama bin Laden and destroyed in 1998 by American cruise missiles for allegedly being a poison gas factory. Saleh Idris is connected to the Tadamon Islamic Bank. This second-largest financial institution in Sudan is part owner of the Al-Shamal Islamic Bank in Khartoum, also founded by Osama bin Laden. On its board of directors sit members of the Faisal Islamic Bank, led by Prince Mohammed Al-Faisal Al Saud. FIB's parent company is the Bahrain-registered Islamic Investment Company of the Gulf, which is in turn controlled by the Dar al-Mal al-Islami. DMI stands as the most important Saudi finance vehicle for the furthering of international Islamic fundamentalism, or Wahhabism, I would add parenthetically. Just one of many threads. Merely a coincidence? The Saudi International Islamic Relief Organization, funded generously by DMI, resides in London at the same address as the bin Mahfouz-owned International Development Foundation, or IDF. Into the IIRO allegedly flowed money of the aforementioned Al-Taqwa management of Lugano, Switzerland. One more time, that last sentence, dealing with one of the sort of end repository elements of this very complex web of evidence that we've been looking at. Into the IIRO allegedly flowed money of the aforementioned Al-Taqwa management of Lugano, Switzerland. It is certain that Osama bin Laden earlier received money from IIRO. Coincidence? Yet the Saudi clans don't just operate in the East. A partner of bin Mahfouz sits on the supervisory board of Carlyle Investment Group. On its board of directors, we find John Sununu, former chief of staff to George H.W. Bush, and James Baker III, Bush's former Secretary of State. President of the board of directors is Frank Carlucci, Reagan's defense secretary, and I would add a highly paid consultant to Carlyle as the aforementioned George H.W. Bush, the ex-president, who has visited the bin Laden family headquarters on 2 occasions. I would add that the younger George Bush sits on the board of directors of a Carlyle subsidiary. That is not mentioned here, but the elder Bush is described here as an advisor to the board of a Carlyle subsidiary. Continuing. Ex-President Bush is an advisor to the board of directors of Carlyle subsidiary Caterair. The Carlyle Group controls large stock holdings in the U.S. defense industry. The bin Laden family has several $1 million invested in Carlyle. Should the financial connections between the bin Ladens and al-Qaeda founder Osama be proven, then in effect the terrorist would receive a dividend for every missile fired on Afghanistan. I would note that the bin Laden family has since pulled out of the Carlyle Group, at least formally. By the way, Salem Mohammed bin Laden is misidentified in this article as bin Laden's father. It is actually his brother. At the end of the 1970s, Osama bin Laden's brother, Salem Mohammed, who became an early investor in the Texas oil company Arbusto. By the way, this is Salem Mohammed. Bin Laden's father was named Mohammed. It is a large family, and many of them have the same names. Continuing. However, the bin Laden-Bush family connections are a matter of public record, and bear in mind the North American business representative for the bin Laden family was the same, James R. Bath, who represented the bin Mahfouz family. Continuing. Speaking of Arbusto Energy, the primary owner was the current president George W. Bush. Arbusto later merged with Harkin Energy. Khalid bin Mahfouz and Gait Faron, both BCCI embezzlers and suspected to have close ties to the terrorist activities of Osama bin Laden, are connected indirectly to Harkin Energy through their partner Abdullah Taha Bachsch, B-A-C-H-S-C-H. Spokespersons for the Bush family insist there are no unseemly connections nor secrets in the business dealings of the president's family members. That may well be. One could also assume that the large financial institutions would never knowingly hold or transfer money for terrorists. Yet there can only be credibility in the war against terrorism when its wagers are ready to extirpate the banyan tree-like networks that have flourished over the years. Will the generals in the Western capitals have sufficient courage to take this objective? Again, a very important question to ask, and again, one wants to avoid oversimplifying relationships like this. I would not necessarily say that petroleum industry interests are involved in bankrolling terrorism per se, but rather Islamic fundamentalism or Islamofascism could sort of be thought of as the malaria bug in the blood that a mosquito transfers unknowingly. And in many cases, that leads to a knowing cover-up by the mosquito when this becomes apparent to some of the people who have been bitten. Again, we're going to discuss some of the complexities in these relationships later on in the broadcast, and later on in this series, but this is also not to in any way exonerate any of these individuals as well. Saudi Arabia, on the other hand, has actively promoted this kind of terrorism. Note again that NADA management, which has been investigated by Swiss authorities in connection with the stock market speculation that took place apparently in connection with the 9/11 attacks, just as it appears to have done in connection with the Kennedy assassination, as discussed in For the Record 327. Note that they're based in Lugano, Switzerland. Note also that that is the base for the Thyssen-Bornemisza family, one of the major elements in the Bormann organization about which I've spoken so many times. Turning to the book Martin Bormann, Nazi in Exile, published in hardcover by Lyle Stewart, by Paul Manning, and reviewing an element we've spoken about in the past about the Thyssen-Bornemisza-Lugano connection, whether or not it's relevant. Heinrich Thyssen-Bornemisza runs his private Dutch-based investment group from Lugano, Switzerland, and his cousin Count Federico Zischi Thyssen, grandson of old Fritz Thyssen, exercises control over Thyssen AG from his base in Buenos Aires. I would also note, in connection with the terrorism that takes place and Islamofascism, that as we have discussed, fascist elements in the Middle East, including Islamofascist elements, have very strong, and as we've just seen yet again, very strong connections to elements in the West that also have strong fascist connections. And the money connection, and the powerful Saudi money connection, is one of those. Research and translation credit on the following goes to Dave White, our pan-European researcher and translator. This article is from L'Espresso's issue of November 22nd of 2001. It's by Peter Gomez and Leo Sisti, S-I-S-T-I, called The Alms of Monsieur Youssef Nada. It reads in part, October 19th, 1997. A Saudi Boeing carrying Crown Prince Al-Walid lands at Miramar Airport in Rimini. A white Rolls-Royce whisks the Saudi prince to a meeting organized by the Piyu Manzu Center. In the middle of a small crowd, ready to pay his respects to the house of Al-Walid, stands a businessman already familiar to the prince, Youssef Nada. The Italian-Tunisian businessman is one of the founders of Al-Taqwa Limited. The prince and the businessman set out for the Novelli Theater, the site of the conference. From the stage, the prince begins his address with the words, "I have confidence in Italy," unquote. 4 years later, August 2001, Prince Al-Walid, the Saudi associate of Mediaset, is received by Silvio Berlusconi. Mediaset, by the way, is a media firm controlled by Berlusconi and apparently involving capital participation by Al-Walid. Berlusconi, currently the Prime Minister of Italy, is a former member of the P2 Lodge, and part of his coalition government is the National Alliance, or Alleanza Nazionale, the successor to the Italian Fascist Party of Mussolini. Continuing. 2 months after meeting Berlusconi, the prince gives a $10 million check to New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. Meanwhile, the name of Youssef Nada appears on George Bush's list of alleged financiers of the terrorist Osama bin Laden. So note that Berlusconi and Prince Al-Walid, an associate of Youssef Nada, allegedly part of the support network of the bin Laden organization, they are all connected. And again, note that it is the profound wealth of the Saudi elite that forms one of the connecting elements between fascist elements like Berlusconi on the one hand, or those with a fascist heritage such as the Bush family who helped to capitalize Nazi Germany on the other, and with elements of the petroleum industry. Once again, one wants to avoid oversimplifying many of these connections. We're going to go into a number of the evidentiary tributaries connecting these in the future. In the meantime, I want to note three things, noting the Serpent's Walk scenario that I've dealt with in the past, and noting also the response to the September 11th attacks of a member of the National Alliance, that is the parent organization of the of National Vanguard Books that publishes Serpent's Walk. This article is from the New York Times of Friday, November 2nd of 2001. It's by Joe Thomas, headlined, U.S. Groups Have Some Ties to Germ Warfare. And it deals with the reaction of the National Alliance. Again, the organization whose publishing arm, the National Vanguard, publishes Serpent's Walk, sort of the Turner Diaries of the Borman organization. A collection of Internet postings by hate groups during and after the September 11th attacks includes a message written by Billy Roper, Deputy Membership Coordinator of the National Alliance, a white supremacist group. Quote, "The enemy of our enemy is for now at least our friend," unquote, Mr. Roper wrote. Again quoting, "We may not want them marrying our daughters," he continued, "but, quote, anyone who is willing to drive a plane into a building to kill Jews is all right by me," unquote. An endorsement by the National Alliance for the September 11th attacks. Now, as mentioned, Ahmed Huber of NADA Management is associated with the NPD, which in turn is the closest German Nazi organization which coordinates with the National Alliance, the publisher of Serpent's Walk that I just spoke about. We're going to review an element. This is from the Daily Telegraph, and this is an article by Toby Helm in Berlin from September 25th of 2001, and this deals with the reaction of Horst Mahler, whom we dealt with in For the Record 333, to the September 11th attacks. It's called German Right-Winger Applauds Terrorists. Horst Mahler, a former member of the terrorist Red Army faction and now a leading voice in the National Democratic Party, said America had got what it deserved and described the victims as, quote, collateral damage, unquote. By the way, the NPD is the top German Nazi organization. Their response to these attacks, very similar to the response of the National Alliance. And bear in mind that Ahmed Huber of NADA Management associated with the NPD. And the concluding element we're going to talk about is an interesting observation about Al-Qaeda and the phenomenon behind its popularity. This from the LA Times of Monday, December 31st of 2001. A story by David Lamb titled, "For Muslims, bin Laden's star is fading as quickly as it rose." Whether or not that's true, note the following observation, quote, "Islam became politicized, and when religions are politicized, that's dangerous," historian Khaja Massoud said in Islamabad. Again quoting, speaking of Islamic peoples, "But our real problem is economic. Our societies are in crisis. They're illiterate, impoverished, jobless. That makes it easy for religious leaders to exploit people at the bottom. It enables fascism to come out of the closet. What we're seeing here is that fascism wears religious cloaks," unquote. That the observation of Pakistani historian Khaja Qhwaja Massoud, Massoud. And again, note the confluence between American fascism of the National Alliance, German fascism of the Ahmed Huber-associated NPD, and Al-Qaeda, or what Mr. Massoud observed as Islamic fascism. The various programs, including previous For the Record shows, available from Spitfire, Spitfire, one word, P.O. Box 1179, Ben Lomond, California, 95005. Their email is mail, M-A-I-L, at spitfirelist.com. You can also visit the Real Audio-equipped Spitfire website for a detailed annotated description of For the Record Program 342. That website is spitfirelist.com, www.spitfirelist.com. www.freedomslive.com. Sister station WFMU in Jersey City, New Jersey is archiving the real audio shows. More recent programs are streaming at www.wfmu.org/Dave Emory. And for all intents and purposes, all of the For the Record programs are available for download only on a longer URL, which is linked to both the wfmu.org/Dave Emory website and to the For the Record section of the Spitfire website. This concludes For the Record 342, Al-Taqwa, being recorded on January 5th of 2002. My name's Dave Emory. Thanks for listening.